Well, thank you very, very much indeed. I've got here thanks. I was just going to start with that, but straight away, thank you very, very much. The only thing I have to tell you, we have a complete complaint against you for leaving us. We think you should have stayed, but anyway, it was wonderful having you as neighbours. What? Speak louder. Okay. Oh, we're going to close the outside. We're going to close the outside door. It's all live. For the people who are watching this, it's all live. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you much better now than that.
Right, excellent.
Also, if you have any air conditioning.
Okay. Anyway, so basically, just to let you know, I wrote a book. This is the book that basically the Shirim are based on. We started this in another building about 6 months ago, and then we stopped that series, and there's a new series, which is this one. But this is part one of a book, and as you can see, it's called Truly Great Jewish Women Then and Now. So the idea behind the book was obviously there just aren't enough books written for Jewish women. Simple as that. There's all sorts of stories about the great lives of Moshe Feinstein and whoever you want to imagine. But when it comes to a bar mitzvah, that's great. When it comes to a bat mitzvah, what's a girl going to get? So my idea was to dig deeply into the stories of the great women of Tanakh, to find aspects of their lives that people have never heard before, to retell their story in the light of those discoveries that I've made. But it's called Truly Great Jewish Women Then and Now, and you can see it's an hourglass with the silhouette of a lady's face, sands going through and carrying on to another lady's face, or silhouette, because you couldn't have a lady's face, of course, in a religious Jewish book. Partly women don't exist. But anyway, so basically the idea was that the next generations, the future generations, the current generations of women walk in the footsteps of their foremothers. I didn't get this when you didn't come. Speak louder, my wife says. Okay. So speak louder. Right, okay. Are you all hearing me?
Yes,
Are you getting the Scottish accent?
absolutely.
The lady from Haifa is not getting the Scottish accent. Animi Scotland. Anyway, so basically that's book one. So we dipped into about, I can't remember, about 6 or 7, and then Yontov came along. But I'm halfway through book 2. In fact, I've more or less finished book 2 in the series. And all I'm looking for is good stories of contemporary Jewish women. The contemporary Jewish women I wrote about after each chapter, Sarah, Rivka, and Rachel, and Leah, was either the wife of my great teachers, or the wife of my chavrusas, or my talmidas, because I've been teaching in seminaries for most of my life, to show you their stories are similar to their daughters carrying on in their footsteps. So I'm now ready to get book 2 finished, and so this is from book 2 we're going to be doing, okay? So that's just an introduction, albeit probably the same graphic there, because I designed it, and I'm a Balgaiva. Probably just a different cover. But you're going to be in this. You're going to help me with this project. And the reason is because, first of all, I want your names and phone numbers and cell phones, because if by any chance you are enjoying the series and you don't want to miss a lecture, we can send you the video. Did I switch that on? Yes. The video, so you can catch up. And on top of that, because I'm incredibly nice, I'm going to send you the actual chapter from the book. Now, the chapter from the book is not identical to the actual share. There's usually much more content I'll get into a share than the chapter. But if you're not good at taking notes and you'd like to have notes, you can just email me and say, could I have the notes or the chapter from last week? Okay? So I think that's pretty good, huh? Excellent. Okay, so here we go. So the lady I'd like to introduce you to here, I mentioned when I first started doing this series of sharing, that very often some of the great ladies of Tanakh, not only are their stories unknown, they are unknown. So very often when I ask people, what was the name of David HaMelech's mother, including rabbis, by the way, all you get is blank looks. What? Who? Did he have a mother? She had a name? No. Nitzevet bat Adiel.
What's your first name?
Nitzevet. Nitzevet bat Adiel. And it's tragic that people don't really know Not only do they not know her name, don't know her story. And I think of all the women in Tanakh, including Sarah and Rachel and all the rest, I think that Nitzebet's story is the most inspiring. I don't think we did that. No, we will do that. So some people don't know their names. Now I'm going to tell you the story of somebody whose name is not told. But I think you'll be familiar with the story. We all know this concept that whatever the theme of the parsha is, it's echoed and reflected in the Haftarah. Right? Okay. So the Haftarah of the Seder of Noso deals with the story of the person who wants to become a Nazir. Incidentally, Nazir was gender neutral. A woman could become a Nazir, or a man could become a Nazir. And usually it was for a period of a month. So unsurprisingly, when the Torah is talking about the story of the Nazir, then we have a story of another Nazir, but it's from Tanakh. Can you imagine, think of a Nazir from Tanakh? Shimshon. Shimshon. So here we go. So if you were to look in Shoftim, in Yud Gimel, and you were to look in Beis rather, it says the following. I'll read this quickly too in English, not take up time. There was a man called Zorach of the Danite family, so he came from the Dan, shepherd Dan, whose name was Manoach, or it says here Manoah. And his wife was barren and had not given birth. That's a strange statement. His wife is barren, and rather obviously she's not given birth, but leaving that aside. And an angel of God appeared to the woman and said to her, "Behold now." This sounds awful in English, doesn't it? Anyway, you are barren and have not given birth, but you shall conceive and give birth to a son. Nice. It's a nice happy ending, this one, really. Well, and of course, unless you're Shimshon. And now be careful not to drink wine or intoxicant. This includes single malt Scottish whiskey. I've never volunteered for being a Nazi. And not to eat anything prohibited to a Nazarite. For you shall conceive and give birth to a son. A razor shall not come upon his head, for the lad, sweet, that's very Scottish, lad shall be a Nazarite of God from the womb, and he will begin to save Israel from the hands of the Philistines. The woman came and told her husband, saying, a man of God came to me, and his appearance was like the appearance of the angel of God. Very awesome. That's awesome in the classic sense, not in the American sense. Awesome. Okay. I did not ask him where he was from, and he didn't tell me his name. He said to me, behold, you shall conceive and give birth to a son. And now don't drink wine, etc., etc. That's the story. So the name of the man was Manoach. What was his wife's name?
Mrs. Manoach.
Good, Mrs. Manoach. And I think she's being shortchanged here. She doesn't get a name. And that's very, very interesting. Why isn't she given? Didn't she have a name? Don't we know her name? Well, yes, we do know her name. Does anybody know her name? It doesn't appear there at all. All the way through, she's just this guy's wife. But she was much greater than her husband. That's the first interesting thing about her. But let's just focus for a second on names. So this is something that has come up before. The Rabbi Meir in the Gemara, in Bava Metzia, if anybody had a problem, it may be a problem for income, it may be a problem with their shalom bayit, it could be bringing up children, the usual stuff, health, whatever. You could go to a Novi, and the Novi would tell you exactly what was wrong. But Rabbi Meir wasn't a Novi. When he had a request for an intervention to help somebody, he would say, what's your name? What's your name? He didn't ask you to write it down. We're not talking handwriting analysis. He wanted to know what your name was, and depending on what answer you would give him, let's say as a husband and a wife are not getting on, they're having shalom bayit problems, then at that point, by hearing the name, he would be able to formulate exactly what the solution to the problem would be. Now, what on earth does that mean? Sounds like gobbledygook. Until you realize that you are your name. The name that you have been given, the name that you were given, in fact, I know of only 2 times in the lifetime of any Jew when you're guaranteed to have Ruach HaKodesh. And that is on a person's deathbed. We're told that what a person says on their deathbed is imbued with, as it were, inspiration from Shemaim. And also when it comes to naming your child. Because even though, and think back to that, even though the amount of work and effort you put in to getting the right name or the name right, ultimately, the name that you came up with to call your child or the name that you were called is because that's who you are. You are your name. Is this ringing a bell for the people who were here last time? For example, if I was to write here the words, or the word water, and then underneath it I wrote H2O, and asked you what have I written, then often people say you've written water twice, but not quite. Water is what we call that stuff in English. In German it's called Wasser, in Russian it's called Vada, in Italian, Spanish, and Latin it's called agua. But you can call it whatever you like. As long as we can agree that that stuff is called by this name, you can call it whatever you like. And that will work perfectly okay. But H2O is what it is, what it's made up from. It's hydrogen and oxygen, of course, at a ratio of 2:1. So therefore, if you know what's in it, then you can play all sorts of good chemical games. Because you know what's inside it. Your name is you. And if, like Rabbi Meir, you knew to analyze what names are, you would be able to see what exactly the personality of the husband is and the personality of the wife is. So let's say the husband, his name suggests strong personality. And let's say the wife, it's a weak personality. Then you could maybe assume that the guy's being far too pushy and bullying in the relationship. That's a very crude example, but that's how it works. You are your name. Now, when we were talking about this in a previous year, I mentioned that in the book of Ruth, nobody in the book of Ruth is actually called by their real name. So, for example, Ruth's mother-in-law was called what? Naomi. Was she really called Naomi, or was she called Jean?
What?
Jean.
Well, she's referred to in the Psukim as Naomi, so we assume.
But what does it say in those psukim? What does it say about her name? Everybody called her Naomi. She was called Naomi because she was so na'im. She was so pleasant and such a nice person. So it seems to be a nickname that people gave her. Like there used to be in Jerusalem a midwife called Bambi. Right? I'm not sure if she's still alive. She's distantly related to us.
She is alive.
Baruch Hashem. And she was like a famous midwife. Now, I'm sure her real name's not Bambi. But it's an affectionate term that people had for her. I don't know why Bambi, but anyway. Because you're Bamberger. Oh, that makes sense. Right. So basically, people get names because of, you're tall, so you get a name that means tall. You're thin, you're skinny, all that sort of stuff. So basically, the name that you get can often be a definitive of what you do or what you are. So Avimelech, Naomi's husband, means, to me, comes Malchus. Machlon v'chilion, as I pointed out before, Machlon means to be forgiven. Chilion means to be destroyed. Ploni Almoni, of course, doesn't have a name. Ploni Almoni just means thingamajig. So nobody in the book of Ruth, it seems to be the real names until I was preparing this year at 4 o'clock this morning. And then I found a Rabbi Dessler. And Rabbi Dessler says something which is absolutely astonishing on this very subject. I didn't get this. So I'm going to read a bit of Hebrew to you, just to show off that I'm a fully qualified rabbi. Okay. And he says like this. Kol Adam Kodim Shenolad, every person before he or she is born, Nikvel loy tafkidoi begiloi kvadi yisborach. Your tafkid in the world. How do you translate tafkid? Purpose. Right? Or your mission in the world is already fixed for you. And of course, you're given the tools to be able to fulfill that tafkid. I can't resist telling you that the rabbi in our shul said something the other week that literally blew my socks, well, not literally, but nearly blew my socks off. And that was, if you look very carefully about the first interaction between God and Adam, it says God takes him and puts him in the Garden of Eden. Do you know what Rashi says there? He had to persuade him to go into the Garden of Eden. Why did he be persuaded? This is cool, no? The Garden of Eden is a really cool place to be. And the answer is that some people sometimes have to be persuaded to, as it were, do or be what Hashem wants you to do or be. sometimes you're jealous of other people's tafkid. His tafkid is a multi-millionaire. I wouldn't mind that tafkid. Right? Or this tafkid is incredibly talented, or she's incredibly beautiful, etc., etc. And you get jealous. No. Hashem's chosen that tafkid for you. And Adam Arishan might, in fact, did resent not having a different tafkid, which led, in a very real sense, to his problems. But let me read on. So, Kol Adam Kodim Shenolad, before anybody's born, Hashem has already decided what unique role, just like no two faces are the same, no two souls are the same, no two roles are the same. What you can do as a Jew, nobody else can do, even an identical twin. Okay. Vayodua Shamazgoz Koichas Kol Echad Be'echad, and the chemistry, the mixture of all the different components that make up us, all the different personality strains. He kafi hanidrash for tafkidozu. That is, you're given all that because you've got to fulfill that role. Kol echad be'echad yeshlo chelik began Eden, and everybody therefore has got their own place in Gan Eden. It's already waiting for you if you fulfill your tafkid. And then he says the following thing. I'm missing out a little bit here. Hare tachonas sheyotz lepol alide avodosam hu oisa hatoichan asher nikva lehem min hakodesh nolda. That is to say that the role that you were given, the job that you were given, and the tools that you were given to fulfill that job, that's perfect for you to maximize the you that you are. And therefore the name that you were given contains that mission. So I thought it was that Nomi is because people called her Nomi, because that's what the Pasuk says. But they called her Nomi because she was pleasant. But she was pleasant because that was the potential that Nomi had, which she worked on and developed and became the promise that her name contained. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I was told that every day, because of everything you said, every day you should call somebody by the name they were given, because inherent in that name are also the brachot that the parents wanted to bestow on this.
100%. More than that, there's a famous rabbi who lived in Pano in Italy. It's called the Ramami Pano. And the Ramami Pano famously says that before any of us are born, we were all taken into a room up in heaven. And if it's a lady, it looks like a lady's dress store or a men's suit store. And you got to choose. There's various garments there, whether it's a lady, it's a dress, or a skirt and a top, or a man, it's a suit. You were able to look at the ones that attracted you. You picked it up. You felt the width. Never mind the quality, feel the width, as they say, old Jewish phrase, and so on and so forth. You can try it on. It suits you. Fine. The price, good. But it's not clothes. It's your life. The Ramami Panel says, he was a famous Kabbalist, lived in the same time as the writing of the Shulchan Aruch. He says that each one of us was taken into a room and shown various lives that you could have chosen. And you chose this one. You chose this tafkid. You knew that it was matim, that it fitted you, and it was appropriate for you. And the important thing is you would not have chosen this if it didn't mean you could have succeeded. If you saw that life, and that seeing your life means your parents and your siblings and everything that happened to you in your life, that was all shown to all of us before we came here. And we chose that, including the bad stuff, including the challenging times and the difficult times and the painful times. And we chose that as well. And we would not have chosen it unless you could have succeeded. So all of the people, the names that we're talking about, you are your name. The potential of you is your name. And that applies to us. And this lady doesn't have a name. And I think that's a shame, Mrs. Manoach. So can we do it a little bit better than that? So the answer is yes, we can. The Gemara in Bava Basra on page 91a says her name was Hatzlel Poni.
What is the second one?
It's one word. Hatzlel Poni. Correct.
Pony or
In
pony?
what language?
I was going to say that. It's Aramaic or Hebrew, I suppose. What does it mean? Thank you so much. Hold on, just a slight commercial break. Right? Yeah. Hatzlel Poni. What does Hatzlel Poni mean? So pony, as you quickly gathered, pony comes from the word ponim. It's connected to face. Hatzil is a name for an angel. She saw an angel, white Hatzil, white two laments. She saw an angel twice. Do you remember the story that we started to read? The angel comes and says, you're barren and you can't have a child, but you will have a child. She goes and tells her husband. He says, oh, where's the guy? I want to see the guy. And the next day he's back. He's back. She saw an angel twice. Her name is Hatzilaponi. Now, was she given that name at birth? I would have said no before I was preparing this shir. But Rabbi Dessa says probably she was. Why did they choose that name? Why do we choose the name for our child? Why was your name given to you? It was put in your parents' mind, or our minds, when we named our children from Shemayim. It was preordained that she was possibly going to see an angel, not just once, but twice. She had the potential to be a woman of such stature, of such holiness, that she could see an angel twice in her life. That's a big deal. Wow. So do you know anything more about this lady? Well, you've actually come across her many, many times before. Just you probably weren't aware of it. The Gemara says that she spun garments and she sold garments in order to support her husband's Torah learning. She also made belts for some reason as well, and again sold them. And that's, I hope your husband been singing to you for the whole of your married life, or for most of your married life. He would sing to you Eshes Chayil. And in Eshes Chayil, in Kov Daled, it says, Sodin osasa v'timchor v'chago l'kanani. She made garments, and she sold them to the Canaanites. That's Canaanite there literally means traders. People go from place to place. It's referring to this lady, Hatzilaponi. That's the person that we're talking about. She is praised for her incredible devotion to Torah, but more than that, this is the biggie. She wove garments, or she had a loom and made them, and sold them to support Torah, but she was also the greatest Talmudic authority of her generation. And men used to come and ask her, what is the explanation of this halacha or this Gemara? And she knew the answer. So she was in quite a high spiritual level. Would you agree? Pretty high. Now, the thing is, when you hear about somebody who's in a high spiritual level, it's sometimes a bit intimidating. Here's Rabbi Dessler again, and this is Rabbi Dessler. You'll find it in the first volume of Mitzvah B'Liyol, and it's page 25. And it says, Zachroni mimei lodasai. I remember when I was just a little child. Kashayiti keben tesha, around about 9 years of age. Asher, his nago abba mori bedodi Reb Gedaliyahu hatzadikim Zachrona livracha, that my father and my uncle, his brother, Reb Gedalia, shahayo kamim balayla, they used to stay up at night, Shabbatot, of Shabbos. Kachatzat salayla, the uncle would come over to the house around about midnight, and they stayed and they used to stay up learning until the time of tefillah. They learned together for 9 hours, as I'm sure your husbands and sons do, as I do myself. V'gam ani, and says Rabbi Dessler, v'gam ani kamti le'eze sha'ot v'lamad Rebbe imodi. And every child wants to be like the grown-ups, and therefore he said, I persuaded my parents that my Rebbe would learn for me with a couple of hours as well. Nice. V'gam ima hatzedekas, and my mother Vetzedekas, who isn't, incidentally, he's talking about his stepmother. His real mother was burned, died of being, there was a fire in the kitchen. Her skirts caught fire. She rushed out in the snow. I assume was able to extinguish the flames. Rabbi Dessa, yes. I assume was able to extinguish the flames, but probably burned herself. An infection, I'm guessing. But his real mother, he never knew. I think he was 3, if I remember rightly. So his mother, whom he recognized as his mother, was his stepmother, whom he adored. And he writes, Gam ima hatzedekas aleh shalom, and my mother, the great Tzedekas, koma v'lomda medrash v'ramban u'mal b'im b'pachshva. She stayed up the whole of Friday night, learning the Pasha with Medrash Rabbah and the Ramban's commentary and the Malbim. Now, when I say that to ladies, that sometimes there's sort of like, sort of expression. I have to tell you, when I say it to men, there's the exact same expression. You know? Couldn't do that. And I stayed up, I think it was on to say how wonderful it was that she was a special cake and special coffee, and you can still remember the smell of the cake and the coffee, etc. But no matter how great, obviously, she was, and we hear about a lady like that, a great tzedekah, it is inspirational on one hand and quite daunting on the other. I'm never going to reach such a level. Of course, nobody says you have to reach such a level. You have to be you. Like, the fact that she was from a family of rabbis going back to Har Sinai, and it was, as it were, programmed into her DNA, that's because that's who she was. It doesn't mean to say that you have to be like her, and it certainly doesn't mean to say, well, maybe it should, I should be, I'm not sure. After all, I still claim to be a rabbi. Anyway, so basically, sometimes it can put you off. They're just so high and so much above us. Okay. But let's go back to this story that we read at the beginning, that everybody knows. The angel of the Medrash Rabbah comes to her to tell her she's going to have a baby, but the Medrash says something different. The Medrash comes and says to do two things. Now that's obviously problematic because, as we know, angels are usually given one task to do. Come across this concept? Yeah. So the question is, why is he doing more than one task? Don't worry. And the answer is, it was really the same task. He came to announce that she was going to become pregnant, and also to make shalom between this great tzedekah and her tzaddik of a husband, who was the greatest rabbi of the generation.
Same angel?
Yeah. But it was the same thing.
Abraham did three.
He had three, yeah, exactly. But this, as I'm saying, this is the problem. How can he do two tasks? It's the same task. Saying you're going to have a baby was making shalom between the two of them. Why? Because her barren state was a cause of great conflict between the two. Which one was barren? Which one was the stoppage of new life coming to the world? He thought it was her. She thought it was him. And that caused quite a bit of conflict. My oldest daughter-in-law is the deputy head of the infertility clinic at Shari Tzedek. And my wife and I, just before COVID, were given a tour of the facility, and I have to tell you, if you want to see incredible miracles in front of your eyes, you can go and see unbelievable things happening. Unbelievable things. Things that, until just decades ago, a few decades ago, were no pun intended, inconceivable. You simply couldn't conceive of this. I've had lots of time, and I could think of appropriate ones. It was astonishing, but I remember one. It looked like a printer you would have in your desk next to your computer, not much bigger than this, and it had a screen about that size, and it was like an iPad screen, and there was a shimmering white circle, shimmering like this, and as I was watching it, it went like this, boop, and then boop. So this first shimmering was a fertilized egg, a cell, a one-cell creature, which then, in front of my eyes, became two cells. And then four, as we all did, as every human being did, four, and then keeps multiplying, obviously, in the same way, on and on. And when it gets to about 300, I think, is when they take it and then they freeze it. And then she showed me, one of the big, looked like a huge cholent pot, with what looked like steam coming out of it, but it was actually, of course, liquid nitrogen. And I was looking at 30,000 potential Jews. I can show you the picture afterwards if you're interested. Or maybe if you want, I can email it to you if I've got your email address. Absolutely astonishing things that they can do. But that is, of course, long after the time of Manoach and his wife. A couple can't have a child. They have no way of knowing if the problem is physically with her or physically with him. But of course, remember, none of the Avot, Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, or their wives, were physically capable of having a child. The whole of the Jewish people, our story, our existence, is consequently predicated on a miracle. The fact that we're here, not just at the ongoing existence of the Jewish people. There's always a Hamas, there's always an Iran, there's always a Hitler, all the way back to Paro. And so Hashem keeps us here by miracles. But not only is the sustaining of the Jewish people by miracle, our inception, our beginning was a miracle. None of our foremothers and forefathers could have a child. And we don't know which one of them can have a child. Do you know which one was barren? Was it Manoach or Hatzatzophes, Pony? Well, what's the story? What did he say? Where did it go? I put my Chumash. Oh, there it is. Yeah, the Chumash says that the angel comes and he says to her, now remember, he's going to make peace between the two. And what did he say to her? Vayam Malach Hashem Elo Isha Vayomer Eleh, and he said to her, Hine no at akara. Now you are barren. So who was the problem with? She. She couldn't have a child. He could. Now, he could have taken a second wife, which he didn't do, which is interesting as well. But never mind. V'lo yolda v'haria v'yoldat ben. So she could never become pregnant. She could never have a child. V'hata hishamar no, and then he says to her, don't drink wine, etc., etc. And she goes to her husband. And when she comes to her husband, she says to him, this Ish appeared to me, and he said, I'm going to have a child. What did she miss out? It's her fault. Up till then, neither of them were sure who the problem was with. When the angel says, you are barren, but not anymore. You're going to have a child. Well, that sort of settles the debate. I could imagine her skipping towards her husband and telling him the angel came. There's a big shiny angel out there, and he says, I'm going to have a child. So I'm barren, but I'm having a child. Worry over. She didn't say that. She said, I'm going to have a child. Why didn't you say that I was barren? When's the word? I was barren. It's actually extremely interesting. It shows you the fact that the greats, the truly greats, the holiest of the holy Jews, are still people, are still ordinary people. And it's profoundly difficult for an ordinary person to admit that they are wrong or they are the source of any problem. Now, this is a woman who was able to tell the rabbis of her generation what the halakha was. She is, angels don't come to, I've not had any angels coming to me so far. I think you can assume I'm not on that level. He was the greatest rabbi of the generation. She was an incredibly holy woman. She still couldn't bring herself to say, and he said it was my fault. The problem wasn't me. Isn't that astonishing? And that is a fundamentally important thing to be aware of. The greatest rabbis and rebbitzins in the history of the Jewish people, and that includes Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov and the rest, were still people, just like you and me are people. I remember when I got married to my late wife, Aleh Shalom, it was in Manchester in England, and I think I may have warned you about this before. It's something, if you're not British, that you should know about. Regarding children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren even, and that is, if you're going to have a child's wedding in England, there are at least 4 speeches at the weddings. What's it like in South Africa?
10.
That's why she moved here. 10. That's why she moved here. Okay, so basically, 4 speeches. So the rabbi of the girls' family, the rabbi of the boys' family, the Rosh Yeshiva of the boys' yeshiva, the head of the seminary of the girls' seminary. That's how it usually goes. I had more, and Ramat Yisrael Solomon, who sadly passed away, I think 2 years ago, I knew for over 50 years, he spoke. And when he spoke, he told the following story. The story was about somebody called the Chazon Ish. Are we all familiar with the Chazon Ish? So the Chazon Ish in the yeshiva world, in the Lithuanian world, the Litvische world, he was the Spitz. What in the Hasidische world perhaps it would be the equivalent of the Satmar Rov. And both were known to be extraordinarily strict. Now that's important for the continuation of the story. Anyway, so somebody, a young lady, came to see the Chazon Ish, the strict Lithuanian Rosh Hashiva, to ask him the following question. She had been set up on a shidduch, and the shidduch was set up with a man who was a Talmud Chochem, an accomplished Talmud Chochem, and she came and she said to the Chazon Ish that she'd met the man, she liked the man, she respected the man, but she wasn't sure if she had the Mesirat Nefesh, the sacrifice, the ability to self-sacrifice to the extent that being married to a Talmud Chochem requires. When I was in yeshiva, when I got married, then I left the house, if I remember, at 7 o'clock in the morning, which means I got up at 6:30. I came back and had breakfast with my late wife, Alea Shalom, and then I let the rest of the day, I made my own dinner. She came back from work, we saw each other for supper at 8 o'clock, and then I started my evening conversation. So if she was still awake, we would chat round about 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock. So that's quite a challenging first year of marriage. So she said she didn't know. She liked the man, she respected the man, but she didn't know whether she had the Mesirat Nefesh, the self-sacrifice required to be married to a Talmud Chochem. And the Chazon Ish said the following thing. Everybody marries for one reason and one reason only. For joy and contentment. And if marriage to a Talmud Chochem would bring you joy and contentment, then a Talmud Chochem is for you. However, if you view it as a Mesiras Nefesh, as a sacrifice, then a Talmud Chochem is not for you. Now, I love this story. And the various seminaries, at least 10, I think, that I've taught in seriously over my career, I always get this story in. Because in seminaries, girls are always told you have to marry a Talmud Chochem. There's nothing but Talmud Chochem. Nothing else exists. Nonsense. The girl has to fulfill her tafkid, and if her tafkid's married to Talmud Chochem, goody, and if it's not, don't marry him. But the thing that I like best in this story is the fact that he said, everybody is allowed to marry for joy and contentment. Who says that you should go into marriage, wanting to, have no money and just scraping pennies together? Who says that's ideal? The Chazon Ish, super strict, said if you look upon it as a Mesiras Nefesh, no good. You're allowed to have joy and contentment. And marriage in which a child is denied is not as happy as when a child is supplied. It's as simple as that. They're in pain. I remember as a young man who was a student of mine when he was 16, and he came to see me a number of years ago, it was about 20 years ago. His wife couldn't have any children, blocked fallopian tubes. And he came to see me because I was an old Rebbe, and he felt terrible about the fact that when they realized the situation, they'd been to many, many different specialists and an umpteen tests, etc. In fact, they'd just been for another test, but it was routine because they knew they were already the answer. But sometimes when he looked, he said, it's her fault. If I hadn't married her, I would have children. And then he felt, because he's a nice fellow, he felt terrible for having that thought. But he did. And so I said, why do you think you can't have any children? So he told me the blocked fallopian tubes. And I said, you mean it's a medical problem? Yeah. You mean doctors told you can't have any children? Yeah. I said, well, that's the problem. Why didn't you go and get a bracha from a tzaddik? So he said, you've been thinking about doing it. I said, really? Well, the Bible says you have to do it straight away. So he went back to Eretz Yisrael, where he was living at the time, and they went to see the specialist for the results of the last test, and the specialist said, I'm very sorry, Rabbi, such and such. But as you know, that's just as we expected. There's no possibility of having a child. However, you might want to consider adoption or surrogate parenting. And he said to him, my wife's pregnant. He said, no, Rabbi, simple brain. You're not following me. You see, the test is as we expected. There is not any possibility that your wife could have a child. My wife's pregnant. No, you've made a mistake. Well, they went on to make 6 mistakes. 6 children were born. Right?
Wait,
No.
Oh, that's right.
Consequently, they
Yeah. No, it wasn't treatment. The normal way that children come into the world. But the stress and the strain between them, that's why it says 2 things. I'm here to tell you you're going to have a child and to make shalom. That was what was causing the lack of shalom. But she's a tzedekah. She's a great tzedekah. Great tzedekahs are still normal human beings, as are great tzedekahs, as are you and I. And the Talmud famously says that if you see a Talmud Chacham who does something really bad, you can be sure if he's a real Talmud Chacham, by the morning he's done tshuva. Or if you see a tzaddik or a tzedekah who falls, they'll pick themselves up and start all over again. In fact, Rosh Shlomo Wolbe says, it's only when you discover the things within you that trip you up, when you discover you've got a temper, you keep shouting at your wife, you keep shouting at your husband, or whatever, if you discover through the things when you fall and you've tripped up and slipped up, that shows you where your flaws lie. It therefore becomes an opportunity to correct them, to solve the issue, to solve the problem. And therefore they move on from that to be able to produce a son who's going to save the Jewish people, nearly the Mashiach. But that's for another share. Hatzel Poni is her name. Hatzel Poni is hard to say. She appears, incidentally, in Divrei Yomim. In Divrei Yomim Aleph, I think it's chapter 4 and verse 3. So that's the only time that her name is mentioned in that. But her name is mentioned. But what she achieved and what she did was astonishing stuff. But don't be put off by this. She still made mistakes because she's a normal human being like you and me. But when we make mistakes, that can be the greatest teacher we'll ever get in our lives. See you next week.
Wait, can I ask a question?
Of course you can.